Welcome back to Something in the Wilderness, a podcast to discuss each of Andrew McMahon's songs from throughout his career. Whether you're a first-time listener or you've been here before, thanks for coming back or thanks for joining us. I'm Steve, and today we brought back Sam from the Pub Trivia Podcast and the Pod on You Loons podcast to the show to discuss a new song that we haven't discussed before. So welcome back to the show, Sam.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me back.
I think it's been about 7-8 months since we talked, and I was glad to get the opportunity to get caught back up with you and see how things been going. So how's the Pub Trivia Podcast coming along?
It's going good. I know you. I saw you on one of the games I hosted on YouTube, so that was really fun to have you join.
My wife and I played together. That was cool.
Yeah, those worlds colliding. And especially since, I'm a legit fan of yours. I was listening to your podcast for several episodes before I was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to reach out on the off chance he lets me come on and do one of these episodes with him. So, yeah, that was pretty cool to have someone that I was a legit fan of come and join and play one of my games on YouTube. And yeah, it meant a lot to me. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, I had a good time. It was my wife and I on a Friday night, as intended. You can do it online. So it was just a cool way to get out and do some pub trivia from home while the kids were in bed. And we definitely want to make it back. We'd probably do a lot better if we had more people on our team, but it was just the two of us, so we were a little limited in our range of knowledge.
Yeah, I always recommend teams of 4 to 8, and I know some teams probably are over 10. So, I mean, people play with who they have, and I think the teams that do especially well have closer to 8 rather than 2, but yeah, we have had a couple of teams play with just 2 people, and it can still have fun and play against the other teams that only have 2 or so people.
While we were playing that night, actually, I texted a buddy of mine who's into pub trivia as well, and I told him about it. And he was like, "Wow, that sounds really cool." So I'll invite him to join us next time. So, and he's pretty smart. He's got a range of the different types of trivia categories knowledge. So. But I remember that you do this other podcast, so I wanted to tell you a story. So you do the Pod on You Loons podcast, which is focused on the Minnesota FC United. Is that right? Soccer team?
Minnesota United FC.
Minnesota United FC. Okay. Yeah, because I know very little about it, right? And this will demonstrate that. So a few weeks ago, I was at a friend's house. My whole family was. We were sitting out on the patio, just hanging around, and they're very into the Columbus Crew soccer team. And they were watching the game. I was kind of that guy, I'm asking questions. What does it mean when that happens? Or how's the timer work? And I've noticed a couple things that are just not how I would expect when I'm watching a football game, American football game or something like that. And so they were explaining it to me very kindly. And my daughters walk up and they're like, "Oh, that team's wearing Target on their jerseys. We're rooting for that team." And so I had to laugh. I was like, "Oh, the Target team. Okay, cool." And it didn't occur to me until later, not that night, that I think that was the Minnesota team. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. We are sponsored by Target,
which makes sense. I put it together eventually. I was like, okay, so when you reached out recently, and we decided to do another episode, I was like, well, I got to tell Sam that I've actually watched his team now.
Not to brag, but we won that game. So sorry, Columbus fans.
I was going to mention that too, because my daughters were like, "Yay, our team won." And I was like, our team didn't win though. But that's okay, because I don't have any kind of stake on either side. So
yeah, it was a great game. And Columbus has one of Minnesota United's most beloved former players in Christian Ramirez. And so he scored a goal against Minnesota that game. And I think half of Minnesota fans were maybe cheering a little bit more than they should have when he scored that goal, because they're so spiteful that the team let him go. And I don't know. It was a wild game for multiple reasons, but
yeah. I learned about the shootout at the end because it was tied toward the end. So that's one of the things I learned about soccer. So. Yeah, but very cool. So it sounds like you're keeping busy with podcasting and I'm sure with work and everything. So
definitely, man.
When Sam contacted me recently to return to the podcast, I was like, of course. And he mentioned this song that we're going to talk about today. Now, I will say I've talked about this album a lot this year. Before this year in 2023, I think I'd only covered 3 songs from this album. This is now the 4th song this year that I've covered from this album. But I just think it's a really special one to a lot of Andrew fans. I think it was at like a seminal time in the lives of a lot of us. And so it makes sense that this one comes up a lot when we talk about memories or, times of our life that, nostalgia, that sort of thing. So I, in fact, remember exactly where I was sitting when I first heard this album. I had downloaded the entire album off of iTunes, as a lot of us did. And I was sitting at my computer, and the song we're talking about today is the opening track off of the album. And if you go back and listen to my resolution episode that I did with Melissa earlier this year, you'll find out why that was a little confusing for me, because I thought the resolution was the opening track. But go back and listen to that episode, get more on that. What I do want to mention here regarding my confusion between the track we're going to talk about and another track on this album is that, Sam, I tend to get this one confused with another song on this album.
Spinning?
Yeah. How did you know? I was going to ask but you answered it already. So how'd you guess that?
Well, I remember months ago when I said possible songs I'd be interested in talking about. Uh-huh. You and I obviously talked about Cecilia and the Satellite, but
yep.
I think I mistakenly wrote Spinning on the list of songs I would potentially talk about. And
so that makes more sense now.
And I'm like, I meant Crashing. Like, we can talk about Spinning, but I meant Crashing. We ended up talking about Cecilia instead, but.
Okay. It's all coming together now.
Yeah.
But even before that, I would get Spinning and Crashin confused. Now, Crashin, to be clear, is the song we're going to talk about today. Crashin with an IN, not Spinning with an ING. So I have to think about that one sometimes, and I've seen it online where Crashing is spelt with an ING, out on lists like Discogs and places like that where people put in the names of a song.
Noobs.
But the truth is, if you look in the liner notes, it's Crashin IN, no apostrophe. And if you look at some place online, you'll see that people put an apostrophe on it. And then Spinning has an ING. Spinning is the second track, Crashin the first track. So just to clear all of that up for Sam, for me, for everybody listening, we're talking about Crashin, the opening track off of The Glass Passenger. It was released on September 30th, 2008. And it's also available as track 21 on the Glass Passenger Deluxe Edition in the form of Live from Omaha version. So now, Sam, when we originally talked about doing the first episode together, which you mentioned was Cecilia about 7 months ago, this was one of the ones that came up. So why this song? Why Crashin'? What's special about this one?
It's funny that I've listened to, I think, most of the episodes where you've talked with people doing Glass Passenger songs, but I guess I didn't really think before that this album just sort of resonates with people in terms of like, where were they, what were they doing, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But this album, for sure, definitely, I have that same sort of story. It came out on September 30th. My birthday is October 1st. My 21st birthday was October 1st, 2008. So I'm a state university student in Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. So your 21st birthday is a pretty big deal at a state school in Wisconsin. But I wasn't really looking forward to my 21st birthday at all. I was looking forward to The Glass Passenger. And so I popped this album in anytime, and it just takes me back to what I was doing junior year of college mm-hmm. in Wisconsin. It just brings me right back. And this being the opening track, that introduction with the piano, it just, like I said, it just brings me back. So that's why this song is so special to me.
Was Jack's Mannequin a band that the people that you hung out with in college would listen to together? Like if you were in the car, was that something you'd put on, or if you were at a party, or is it just something that you were into and it was kind of your thing?
Yeah, definitely in college. Yeah. Like I grew up in high school listening to Something Corporate, and mm-hmm. not a lot of people at my high school listened to Something Corporate. They were way more into rap or pop or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so Jack's Mannequin comes out my senior year of high school, and not a lot of people knew them. Not a lot of people had heard of them. I go mm-hmm. to college, and I don't know, maybe just an influx of people from like suburban Twin Cities where that type of music would have been a little bit more popular. But I had a lot of people I went to school with that knew Jack's Mannequin, and we would go to the concerts together. And we still, like, now we're in our mid 30s. We don't see each other that often, but we get together for Andrew McMahon shows because that's just kind of what we did back in the day. And we still like doing it now. So
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, my wife has a good friend from college that we haven't hung out with much in the last decade. And we recently reached out to each other and we were like, Andrew's going on tour. Let's get together and go see them together. We're going to do that as well. It's friends that live a few hours away, so it's hard to get together. We both have young kids, as I know you do. So you know how hard it is to get out for a night, especially in a faraway city. So yeah, that's cool that we can reconnect with our friends from college over this, this music. That's great. So let's talk a little bit of background on The Glass Passenger. It was recorded in late 2007, early 2008, and according to an alt press article from January '09, Andrew was apparently listening to a lot of Fleetwood Mac, Neil Young, and the Byrds, and he was looking to incorporate elements of those acts as well as nods to Motown and elements of 60s rock, such as from legendary producer Phil Spector. Now, I've just kind of rattled off a few artists and genres there, Sam, but do you hear in this album in general, or maybe in Crashin in particular, do you hear any of that? Fleetwood Mac, Neil Young, the Byrds, pop from the 60s, any of that?
now that you say it, I can hear some of it. The obvious one to me was always Tom Petty, and kind of comparing Andrew McMahon to Tom Petty, just because he
Yeah.
would talk about Tom Petty all the time, and he would
Hmm.
even cover American Girl a lot when you'd go to his shows. So I always did kind of previously make the comparison to Tom Petty, just sort of like the melodic nature of Jack's Mannequin songs. But
Sure.
no, I hadn't really thought about those other artists that you said, but it makes a lot of sense.
They wouldn't have come to mind for me either. Now that I have the comparison on paper from this journalist, presumably from Andrew's mouth, I guess I could see like the Fleetwood Mac connection, the popular Fleetwood Mac songs that I personally know. I can see that. And the Byrds. I was listening to a few Byrds songs earlier, and I was like, yeah, I guess I could see that kind of easy guitar, folky. Not that Andrew's folky, but easy to listen to, pop elements, rock. Definitely hear that. I don't know about the other stuff, but those are the only connections I can make, but only because it was handed to me on a silver platter. So otherwise, I wouldn't have thought of those. So this track was produced by Jim Wirt and Andrew, along with the rest of the album. And besides Andrew on piano and keyboards and vocals, Jay McMillan plays the drums, Bobby Raw plays the guitar, Jonathan Sullivan on bass, CJ Erickson contributed drums and programming, and then on background vocals, we have Stacy Clark, PJ Smith, and Jim Wirt, as well as Patrick Warren on the bells, and Max Cohn on additional percussion. Let's talk about live music. So, on the last time I had you on, we talked about the first time that you saw something corporate, but we actually didn't talk much about Jack's Mannequin. So, it sounds like you have seen Jack's Mannequin in concert?
Right when I was in college, that was the Jack's Mannequin era. I would go,
Mm-hmm.
Summerfest in Milwaukee. He would play that a lot.
Right.
I would typically see them when they would come through the Twin Cities, as I went to college only about 90 minutes away from there. So yeah, I've seen Jack's Mannequin. I mean, maybe now Andrew Man in the Wilderness, maybe now I've seen that iteration of his music more in
Mm-hmm.
concert, but it's close. Like I saw Jack's Mannequin once or twice a year, every year for a while.
Wow.
I even saw the 10 Years in Transit show. So
Oh, yeah. That was great.
yeah, so definitely I've seen Jack's Mannequin quite a few times, and
This probably goes without asking then. You must have seen them around the Glass Passenger days then, right?
for sure, yeah.
Okay. I didn't. I don't think I did. Let's see. Right, I saw them twice before The Glass Passenger came out. And then I saw them right before People and Things came out, but I didn't officially see them on either of the quote album tours for those albums. So, well, that would have been a good show, I bet. So,
Yeah.
do you have any recollection? See, I don't have good memories for these things unless I look them up on Setlist FM. But do you know whether you saw this song live? Would that be like a specific memory that you had?
It's funny you ask that. So I don't consider this a song that he plays very often, at least not anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But I did look up some of the past. Like I had a T-shirt from the Songs for Supper tour, so I knew the exact date that I saw Jack's Mannequin play. And I look up, what was the set list? Did he play Crashin?
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, that song was played. I don't have a specific memory,
Okay.
and then because I know I'm about to come on the show, I was going through a little Jack's Mannequin kick, and I load up the live from El Rey Theater, and I had forgotten that Crashin was one of the songs he played at that concert for that recording. So I got to sort of see him play it on a recording, but see him play it live once again. I'm sure other times during the Glass Passenger era, I'm sure I saw it other times. One kind of just claim to fame I have from sort
Mm-hmm.
of the very, very, very early Glass Passenger era is the summer before the Glass Passenger came out. I was at Summerfest in Milwaukee, so summer 2008, and he announces that he's going to play a song that he's never played before that's going to be on his upcoming album. So I get out my cheap little digital camera,
Mm-hmm.
and it's crowded. Like I'm pretty close to the stage, so it's pretty crowded, and people are knocking into me and whatnot. So I didn't hold the camera very steady, but I filmed Swim during the first time he ever played it, and I put it on YouTube, and I think that is still my most streamed YouTube video of all time.
Oh, you'll have to send that to me. I mean, I know you said that the quality's not great, but still, I'd like to see that. I have a similar memory. So I remember, I was pretty sure it was Swim, but I wasn't actually positive. I was not as savvy or technically or any other way to take video. But in the summer of 2008 at Warp Tour, I remember him saying we have a new album coming out soon, and we're gonna play a song. And I think it was, I'm pretty sure it was Swim, but I'm not sure. But that was in more late July, so it went after Summerfest, obviously. That's cool.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because the very first time Crashin was played live is actually on YouTube as well, if you can believe that.
Okay.
It was in St. Louis in 2008. So I'll link that in the show notes of the very first time Crashin was ever played in concert. Regarding more modern times, again, going back to what I said earlier. So when you mentioned let's do Crashin, I was thinking of Spinning. And as evidence of that this happened more than once in my life, I was thinking about the time I saw the pod shows in Pontiac, Michigan in 2021. And I was like, oh, that's right. He played Crashin' at those shows. Great. Let me go back and look it up. Nope, that was Spinning both nights, not Crashin'. But I'll have you know that I was right with 11/11 last year. 11/11 2022 in Chicago. They opened the show with Crashin', and I was pretty certain of that one because there was another fan I met last year going to these shows. Her name is Julie. She's from Ohio, and that's one of her favorite songs. And I remember hearing it in the sound check. I didn't go to the sound check officially, by the way. We walked into the House of Blues, my family and I, to ask some questions because we were trying to strategize on how we were going to get a decent spot. And they let us into the lobby, and we were looking around, and they were actually sound checking so we could hear them. We couldn't see them, but we could hear them. And they were sound checking Crashin'. So I was excited for my friend, who I knew she wanted to see that song. And then lo and behold, they opened with it. I do have that very specific memory of seeing that song for that reason. So, but usually I don't have really specific memories with specific songs at concerts. But this one I happened to, and it was pretty recent, so that probably helps. But
That's
yeah,
that's cool. And I would have
yeah.
streamed that show, and I kind of forgot that he opened with that. So that's cool.
Yeah, and I do this sometimes. My wife is like, "What?" But I pay for the stream even when we go to the shows. There's been once or twice I've done that. I did that for the pod show in Pontiac a few years ago too. It's like, well, I want to see it afterward. After we get to see it in person, I want to actually come home and watch it too.
Well,
And she's like, "Whatever."
they've been very high quality.
Yeah, they
I
are. It's like watching a concert film.
I wish there was a way to sort of collect these.
Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned I recently watched the live from the El Rey Theater.
Yeah.
So the reason I actually recently bought this DVD, and the reason I recently bought this DVD is I was like, I want my kids to be able to experience this someday if they want to.
Mm-hmm.
I if they grow up kind of liking this music, which they may or may not, but
Mm-hmm.
if they grow up liking this music, he's such an electrifying performer. Like I want them to be able to
Yeah.
watch like these recordings of these concerts that I wasn't at that exact one, but would have been at those concerts in that era. And I already had the Something Corporate live from Ventura Theater or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like I wish that some of these live streams, I wish they were available for purchase, to like have a copy going forward, like a permanent copy, because
Right.
someday the kids might want to watch it.
Yeah, like I'll say the old days, but it wasn't that long ago that you could just buy, like you said, a DVD of a show, and they don't do that. They still sell the DVDs from 15 years ago, but they don't sell DVDs or even let's say, the videos of the newer concerts. I mean, they probably know someone's going to go put it on YouTube, but
Right.
and that'll be it. But so it's probably not worth it to produce it. But
With that said, I mean, watching those live streams is so much fun.
yeah,
I feel like I've quadrupled the amount of Andrew concerts I get to go to in a year,
right,
because
same,
I get every live stream, and
yeah,
again, it's fun. You hear more stories about these same songs, and
hmm
you kind of just experience the different set lists and the different surprises. Like, I talked in the last show, like I went to the Hello Gone Days tour and had no idea he was going to play Hurricane, because I was there at the
yep,
first leg, and I had
hmm
no idea that he was going to play that. And it was so cool.
and he was still playing that song this past May as well. I was surprised, but he played it again in May in Michigan when I saw him. Definitely a crowd pleaser, of course. People love it. We love it. So
Yeah.
yes, and speaking of live streams, so Andrew did perform Crashin' on Instagram Live back in May 2020, and I think it was May 13th specifically, so I'll link that one in the show notes. But I remember what was funny about that one, which seems so silly nowadays, but I remember that was the live stream where he came on, and prior to that day, he had a full beard and some long wavy hair before that. But he came on and he had shaved his head and cut off all his facial hair. And that was big news in the fan base, apparently. People were like, ooh, he cut his hair. But apparently we didn't have much to pay attention to in May
Yeah.
of 2020. So we were just kind of grasping at whatever we could find. And that was Andrew Mann singing Crashin' with a whole new haircut. So just had to mention that. Like, what was news back then? It was like, we didn't want to read the real news. So
I missed that finer detail. Will be honest.
and that's okay. Yeah. I didn't expect most people to pick that up. I think. Oh, when I went back and watched it recently, it reminded me of that time, like in the chat. So when you watch it on YouTube, you can still see all the chat, and I think people were talking about it, like, "Oh my gosh, he cut his hair! Wow, he looks so different."
For those who are not watching Tiger King.
Right, yeah. No, I watched that later at night after the live stream, of course. All that good stuff.
Yeah,
So
too.
again, we were kind of grasping at the time for
Grasping
something.
grasping is right.
Yeah. Surprisingly, this song's been played more than I would think in concert overall. It's been played 185 times total in concert that I know of, according to Setlist FM. The last time being in Atlanta on July 22nd, so pretty recently. And 117 of those were with Jack's Mannequin. 13 was Andrew McMahon solo, and 55 times is The Wilderness. So it seems like that
Okay.
number's going up in the last couple of years, apparently. Or spinning is, I don't know if I can keep them straight. So, but those are the numbers for Crashin'. So from a songwriting standpoint, Andrew did write the song solo, and the story goes that he had writer's block around that time after in the post-transit era, let's call it. And he's stated in interviews and things that there was a couple of songs that broke his writer's block, and Crashin' is one of them that he's called out. I think when we get to lyrics, I think that maybe that theme will come up a little bit, because the lyrics are actually about writer's block, and it was also written about the infamous Silver Lake house, which I've mentioned a couple of times on this podcast because Andrew references it sometimes when he talks about his other songs. In fact, the very last episode I did was Maps for the Getaway, and that was about his house in Silver Lake. And so this song here that we're talking about now was written there, which I think is kind of a cool connection.
Can you remind me? I read his Three Pianos autobiography, but which house was Silver Lake?
It was the one where he wrote Annie, Use Your Telescope, he wrote Crashin', and then when he was trying to get inspired for, I think it was the first Wilderness album, he would drive by that house on the way to the studio and kind of stop and write. And so that's why he references it in Maps for the Getaway.
Okay.
And then during that Instagram live stream I just mentioned a little while ago, I remember him specifically mentioning the lyrics. Even if my voice comes back again, maybe there will be no one listening. And he suggested that maybe a lot of people around that time were kind of feeling that way. And so I think during the pandemic, this song maybe meant a little bit something different to him than when he actually wrote it. But I know when he initially wrote it, he was wondering if after he got sick and he had to take time to recover, he had to take time off from touring, he was wondering if by the time he made another album, people would still care. People would still come out.
Right.
I think people like you and I have answered that question.
And he's referenced that not only about when he got sick, but I know he's mentioned it in the wilderness era. I stopped being Jack's mannequin and kind of set off in a new direction. I've heard him say he didn't know how many people would come along for the new ride.
Mm-hmm.
He's expressed a lot of gratitude. He frequently expresses gratitude. He often will talk about like, thank you all of you for being here, allowing me to live this life,
Mm-hmm.
make music for a living, do what I love, that sort of thing. But he's also expressed that it wasn't a given, when he has left, his very successful bands in the past, when he left something corporate, when he left Jack's Mannequin, when he left those behind, it wasn't a given that people were just going to keep going with him. And I
Right.
think that that's a feeling that a lot of us can relate to, right? We all have these stages in life, and you progress from one to the next, and there are a lot of unknowns. Like, will people, will people still listen? Will people still be with me? Will people still be along for the ride and sort of value me the way that they did once upon a time? And yeah, I think that that is a really cool line in that song.
Yeah, I think that's a great point you make in life in general. As we move through these different eras or chapters of our life, whatever you want to call it, and we, some friends stick around and some friends kind of fall off, and for various reasons. And but you do wonder. You're like, oh, if I make this change, either whether it's just geographic, got to move, or lifestyle change, or job, or whatever, are people going to come along for the ride? So it's an interesting concept. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah,
Yeah.
didn't think about that way, but yeah, it's when he changes monikers or names, a lot of people do come along. Not everybody, I think there are people out there who are just something corporate fans, and there's people out there who are more Jack's Mannequin, and there's a lot of us though that are like, hey, I loved his stuff in something corporate and wanted to know what he was doing next. And I think we talked about this the last time you and I talked. I've been ride or die. There's always something I find that I like about the new stuff.
Yeah. I just rewatched the Dear Jack documentary
Mm-hmm.
because I was trying to see if there was anything that would relate to talking about this song. There really wasn't. But now that I think about it, you bring up that lyric, it showed footage from some of those very first Jack's Mannequin concerts before he had his diagnosis. But he's playing under the name Jack's Mannequin, and no one knows who he is. And
Mm-hmm.
so, right after being hugely successful with something corporate, again, I came into something corporate because I heard them on the radio, right? It wasn't through the grapevine. Someone's like, dude, you gotta give these guys a try. No,
Yeah.
I heard them on a what at the time would have been called Clear Channel Radio. I heard them on a Clear Channel radio
Mm-hmm.
station. Now would be iHeart, but whatever. I heard of them on a big corporate radio station. They were
Right.
playing something corporate and fell in love with them, right? Something corporate was huge. And then same guy playing under the name Jack's Mannequin, and he's playing in front of like 30, 40 people. And, you know, the documentary just sort of showed that it took people a little while to jump on board, to
To make the connection.
maybe they didn't realize that this was the same guy. But for whatever reason, it took people a while to hop on.
Did you know right away? Do you remember being in tune to that when he released an album as Jack's Mannequin, the first album? Were you familiar with the fact that that was the guy from something corporate?
I do remember pre-ordering everything in transit, and
Oh, so you definitely knew.
yeah, I pre-ordered it and it came with the mixtape, but I don't totally remember how I figured that out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe I saw it on MySpace or something, but I do remember pre-ordering the album and being able to download the mixtape. And yeah, so I did hop on board right away, but
I was obsessed with the North album. I just listened to that all the time, and I remember going to a store called Media Play, and I think I've told this story on the podcast before. I'll just give you the brief version. And I opened Entertainment Weekly, and I was kind of thumbing through it. It was a type of store that had, CDs, movies, magazines, books, all media, kind of like a Barnes and Noble. Not as much focus on books though. And I was flipping through this magazine, and I saw Entertainment Weekly interview with the former lead singer of something corporate, and I started reading it, and I was like, oh, he's coming out with a new album. And I am not positive whether that album was already out when I read that article or it was coming out like the following week, but you can bet I either bought it that day or the day it came out when I read that. That's how I made the connection. And it's neat because when I talked about that on the podcast probably a couple of years ago now, I actually looked up that article, and it's still out there on the internet on Entertainment Weekly. So that it's just kind of a one pager, but it was neat to kind of go back and reread that and think, wow, I remember sitting in the store in 2005 and finding out that one of my favorite artists had another album coming out. So
Yeah.
let's talk about the sound of the song a little bit. So, from an alt press review from 2008, this was quoted by the journalist there. Crashin' is the equivalent of driving on the freeway with the wind in your hair, a racing tune with frenetic piano runs, and Beach Boys-esque layered harmonies. I definitely agree with most of that. Kind of a racing tune, frenetic piano runs, maybe even a little bit the Beach Boys. I don't know. I don't necessarily get that directly, but I thought it was an interesting way to put it. I've heard so often the Everything in Transit era was compared to his love for the Beach Boys, or like was kind of made connections to his love for the Beach Boys. But I honestly never thought that way about the Glass Passenger. I've never heard a Glass Passenger song and said, oh, Beach Boys connection.
I mean, I've always felt that Everything in Transit is a great summer album, and I've always felt The Glass Passenger is a great fall album. I know that a huge part of that just has to do with what I was doing when those albums were released, but
you're right. Yeah, that's how I feel too.
Right, I talked about my 21st birthday. This album more or less came out on my 21st birthday. You know, I remember driving to where I was working that year on the highway, the leaves kind of coming down, while, you know, specifically this song, since it was track number one, you know, so I think of it as more of a fall album, right? Even though Everything in Transit, right, it's about a breakup and getting back together. So not all of those songs are necessarily fun songs, but Everything in Transit has such a fun vibe.
Yeah.
And then with The Glass Passenger, it's just a little heavier. You know, not all the songs are. I think really Caves is probably the only one coming to mind that's like specifically about being sick, right? Like The Glass Passenger comes out, all those songs were written, you know, after he had leukemia. So I just think of The Glass Passenger being a little heavier and,
Definitely.
you know, not as fun and carefree like Everything in Transit. I don't know if other people agree with that, but
yeah, fun and carefree. That's a good way to put it. It went from fun and carefree to deep and heavy in content. So I completely agree with you there. So it was just a different feel. What's interesting about this opening track and kind of where it leads us for the album is that it kind of opens more with a guitar, like some noodling on guitar. And I've noticed that sound, which I'll be honest, I really didn't notice until I started digging into these songs in the last couple of years, that it's really based around, a lot of the songs are based around guitar, and the piano at times takes the back seat, which I'm okay with. I mean, if it makes whatever makes a good song. But this song kind of starts with some kind of smooth guitar. I don't know how else to put it. It's like
yeah.
But then it kind of, as the verse picks up, you get more of the piano into it. I like the way they melded the guitar and the piano more. It wasn't like a grungy sounding guitar like we get in the mixtape or I'm Ready from Everything in Transit. It was more of a kind of light, airy, I hate to use this, some people don't like this word, jangly guitar to describe that. I know that's like how people describe like Better Than Ezra and Gin Blossoms, whom I love, by the way, but some people don't like that term, jangle pop or jangly guitar or whatever, but that's kind of how it struck me in this song.
I also love the Gin Blossoms, and I never really made the comparison between the Gin Blossoms and Jack's Mannequin before, and I hear it. I definitely hear it.
Some slight comparisons, I would say.
Yeah.
You know, there's definitely, I mean, there's a reason I think I appreciate both of them in the same space. So, but what I've noticed about this song, and maybe this is why this song doesn't like jump out, it doesn't stick out to me on the album. It's just kind of there. And I do like the song, don't get me wrong, but it's very even. It's very like samey most of the time throughout the song. And so I think that's why it's never stuck out to me before I started, and maybe that's why I get it confused with Spinning. Maybe Spinning isn't exactly like that, but it doesn't have any kind of, to me, any kind of build up to something big to me.
Sure.
I don't know. What do you think? Am I off base in saying that?
I mean, I think you are kind of right in the sense that like the feel of the song is pretty steady. I just love the way that it sets the album up. It, you know, just kind of coming out strong as just sort of a quintessential Jack's Mannequin song, right? piano driven, but as he talked about with the
Hmm.
guitar is still very prominent in there, driving the song along. I was just kind of thinking like Bobby Raw, like if you were to ask him what era of the catalog is your favorite, he has to go with Jack's Mannequin, right? The guitar
Yeah,
is way heavier in Jack's Mannequin than
yeah.
they've been since the Wilderness era.
Hmm.
I would just assume he loves playing these old songs because he's featured very prominently. Everyone recognizes what he's playing. If he wasn't there playing, like you might not even recognize the song.
Hmm. I've always wondered this when it comes to songwriting. I know there's reasons how the songwriters are listed, who's listed, and if someone's listed at all. But I've always wondered about other band members' involvement. So I don't think Andrew wrote how the guitar was going to be played, right? So I got to believe that Bobby or someone made that decision. And there's some really creative guitar in this song. I love the way it's played.
Mm-hmm.
I credit where credit's due. I think there's some, not only good piano work here, good lyrics, but also good guitar work, guitar and bass. And I feel that throughout this song. And that's one of the things that I notice when I wear these, kind of more studio quality headphones. I notice those things a lot more actually that I wish I'd noticed when I was driving around in the car with it. But we also get some nice backing harmonies here. It did say in the liner notes who the backing vocals are. Stacy Clark, PJ Smith, and Jim Wirt. I really like the sound of them. I actually thought that was
Yeah,
Bobby.
I'm sure live it was probably Bobby, but
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, he does that. He's great at the backing vocals live.
yeah, and that's probably where I forget what publication you're quoting, but the harmonizing. I bet that they were kind of listening to that and reminded of the Beach Boys. Like the Beach
Yeah,
Boys had some great harmonizing, and
that was from Alt Press. I'll link that in the show notes so everybody can read that who's interested. So
yeah, I'll have to go back and look.
there's also this nice little piano solo in the after I think it's right around the bridge, which I really enjoy in concert. I remember enjoying that specific piece in concert, and so that is something I remember about hearing this song at least the one time last fall.
That's great because he like stands up, he like kicks over his bench or
Yeah.
whatever. Like he's such
Yep,
a rock star. Like
he is.
I think that was one of the first things my wife noticed when she got into Andrew's music because of me, and I took her to like the something corporate reunion show at Lollapalooza. It wasn't at Lollapalooza, but it was at the Lollapalooza grounds. I think it was called the Bamboozle.
Okay, yeah,
I took her to that in 2010, but that was more of a something corporate. You kind of more expect it from something corporate. But the next concert I took her to was 2016. It was the Everything in Transit, 10 Years in Transit or whatever.
yeah.
And I don't think she was expecting how mobile the guy is, even though he's playing an instrument that can't move around with you.
You, you,
Yeah.
yeah, you'd think he'd be tied down to the piano, but he finds a way
Not
to move around.
exactly. Yeah, he's got like what, four microphones positioned around
Yeah,
him, and he's taking turns screaming into each one, kicking over his bench. I don't think she expected that at all.
yeah. My wife and I were at the 10 Years in Transit tour. She's never seen something corporate, but she will have the opportunity to see them with me in Vegas in a couple of months, which
Ooh,
I'm super excited for. I'll see them at the side. We'll see them at the side show. She's surprised at how much she likes. She's like, I don't know how many songs of theirs I like, and every time I play a song, she's like, oh, I know that one. Yeah, I know that
yeah.
one. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, but yeah, she likes more like the ones he keeps in the modern set list, like Kavanaugh Park and I Woke Up in a Car, which I'm sure they'll play in
Oh yeah,
October. How could they not?
yeah.
So she'll finally get a chance to see something corporate. When we see something corporate, we will have seen all three iterations together finally. So, which will be pretty cool.
Yeah, I guess my wife and I have beat you and your wife to
Yeah,
seeing all three iterations.
yeah, you
Even though
have. So
I'm sure my wife has been to significantly fewer concerts. It just
I don't know. I don't know. My wife goes to most concerts. My wife goes to. It's because of me. So
yeah.
she's like, "All right, we're not gonna plan every vacation around an Andrew show, right?" Like, no, no, we are not. Just this one more, at least.
One a year.
Yeah, we'll see what he throws at us next year. I don't know. Maybe he'll come up with something more that I just can't miss again. So I'll
Yeah.
have to plan a vacation around it. But yeah, she likes to vacation with the kids, of course, as well as I do. So we've got to have a balance. So we got to do the Vegas, but we also do the family thing, of course. You ready to talk some lyrics?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Hey, I have to admit, This isn't one I've paid much attention to the lyrics over the years, so I just read them like in the past couple weeks, and there's some good lyrics here, but I don't have a history with them. So, are there specific lyrics that jumped out at you when back in around your 21st birthday or the years following that really stuck with you?
I think you already brought up the one that probably jumps out first. The even if
Mm-hmm.
your voice comes back again, maybe there will be no one listening.
Mm-hmm.
But I think kind of going along with that, right in the first verse of the song, second paragraph, if you will, the I want to hear some music and with the rock stars all flicker and fade. I think it kind of goes hand in hand with the chorus
Oh yeah.
of maybe not everyone is along for the ride forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
All stars kind of, they flicker and fade and eventually burn out. And
Yeah.
he brings up a great point. All rock stars will eventually flicker and fade the same way. Like you have your 5 minutes of fame. Some people get to stay in the spotlight a little bit longer. Only a few get to truly become, absolutely timeless to the point where people are listening to your music generation after generation after generation. I think that that's a cool lyric. It kind of reminds me of I don't know if you were a Third Eye Blind fan back in the day, but
Still am.
yeah, the song "Graduate" from the first
Oh yeah.
self-titled album, where the lyric goes, "Will this song live on long after we do?"
Yeah.
Just kind of reminds me of that.
Yeah, I love this lyric. And just a side note about Third Eye Blind, I happened to see them in concert last month
Oh,
and
awesome.
got to see that song live, fortunately.
Yeah,
So, long term fan. I love this lyric too, actually. With the rock stars all flicker and fade, like you've already pointed out. There's a lot of artists that Andrew grew up with that kind of hit it big, so to speak. Big within the genre, let's say. Most of them didn't get to go on and do what he did.
right.
Most of them had some good pop punk years, let's say, and some of them are revitalizing their careers in the latest pop punk boom these last few years, which is awesome. But
It's so funny. But yeah, it's awesome.
a lot of them have been like dormant for years because that was their era. That was they were popular, and either they broke up or didn't make it or stopped writing music that people wanted to hear or whatever. Whereas Andrew went on, so it was a legit fear because he saw it happening around him, right?
Absolutely. Like I was just at a Yellow Card concert,
Mm-hmm.
and they were playing in a venue that was bigger than they had ever played in their heyday.
Yep.
So Ryan Key said, and this is the Armory in Minneapolis. So a
Mm-hmm.
big venue. Definitely not a small theater by any means. And he's like, I don't think we ever played a venue this big. And he's like, we broke up because we thought people were kind of done with us. We weren't writing new music. He said, I went and played with Mayday Parade because they were still doing stuff and I just wanted to keep playing. And he's like, all of a sudden people started listening to our music again and talk about a new tour came up and they're like, well, I guess we'd be silly not to if we're able to sell at these giant venues. But yeah, I mean, besides Yellow Card, I think I'm looking at like my CD shelf right now, and I see just this giant stack of albums that no one's gonna pick up again.
Mm-hmm.
Though Yellow Card didn't think people were gonna pick up their album again, but
Right.
I don't know. I have stacks and stacks of CDs that I don't think I could get 50 cents for them.
What's funny is that there's bands that are kind of coming back around now, like All American Rejects are touring, and in the starting line, and Boys
Yeah,
Like Girls. So all three great bands. But yeah, 5 years ago, most people were like, "Yeah, that's an old band. I used to listen to them." And now it's like they're touring and they're making money. It's great for them. But
yeah.
yeah, so a lot of them did kind of fade away. What about this next line? So right after the line that you just pointed out, pirate radio music. I'm a ghost over ground on parade. I have no idea what he means by that.
Well, did you ever see the film Pirate Radio with Philip Seymour Hoffman?
I've never seen it, but I'm familiar with what it is.
So I was wondering if that's what he meant, like
Mm-hmm.
the pirate radio station that was broadcasting forbidden rock and roll from the sea.
Uh-huh.
He repeats the line, "I want to hear some music," a lot, but he seems like he's kind of specific about the kind of music he wants to hear. Like he wants to hear good music, not just I don't know, not just commercial bubblegum or anything like that. And maybe
Right.
that's what he means. Like I want to hear the good stuff.
Okay.
That's my only hypothesis. I
No,
don't know.
that's better than anything I came up with because I truly have no idea. I just saw these lines and I was like, I don't know what he means, but the words flow nicely together. That's about all I get from it. But I wanted to point out Ghost Overground in the lyrics also because that was, I don't know if you remember, but that was an EP released
Yeah.
that summer, kind of leading up to promote the Glass Passenger album. And the Resolution was on there, Bloodshot, and then a couple of live versions of songs, I think. Kill the
Yeah.
Messenger, maybe. But it was called The Ghost Overground. And there were years where I didn't put that connection together. Like, oh, he says Ghost Overground in the opening track on Glass Passenger. I didn't really realize that until more recently, let's say.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, like, what does that mean? What is a ghost overground?
Yeah, I'm a ghost overground on parade. I don't know. I'd be interested to learn what he meant by that. And then so after that line, he goes into that chorus, those lyrics that we've been talking about. Even if your voice comes back again, maybe there'll be no one listening. And then later in the song, he changes it to, even if my voice comes back again, maybe there'll be no one listening. By the time the third chorus comes around, the lyrics to me that stick out after reading them, again, never noticed these particular lyrics while listening to the song all these years. And by the way, we're coming up on the 15-year anniversary of this album, if you can believe that. So
feels like yesterday I saw 10 years in transit. Like,
yeah, now we're 15 years of Glass Passenger. We're 18 years for everything in transit as of yesterday at the time of this recording.
Jeez.
And in a month, we'll be at 15 years of Glass Passenger, as well as the 15th anniversary of your 21st birthday, apparently.
Yeah.
So
Oh, man, that feels great. All right.
yeah. But the bridge here, and the whole world comes down, down, downwards, the words and all the water on this broken town. And then the last line was especially pertinent to me. The freeway's just like veins without a heart. There's those poetic Andrew lyrics
Yep.
I love so much. I'm a fan of that bridge.
That line, the freeway, just like veins without a heart, kind of reminds me of a little bit of Jesus of Suburbia by Green Day.
Oh, yeah. I get the visual.
City of the Dead, right? I live in Minneapolis or suburban Minneapolis. We have traffic, but not like California. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe that's kind of a theme of just these
Massive freeways, interspliced.
godforsaken
Yeah.
freeways and traffic
Yeah.
jams. And
I feel like there's a point in the song, and I don't know if you've noticed this. It just kind of occurred to me this week, though, after listening a few times more to it. So the song's over 4 minutes long. When you say it out loud, it sounds kind of like long, but then again, if you look at some other songs on this album, there's some long songs on this album. And so this one was kind of average, probably. About the 3:15, 3:10, maybe 3:10, 3:15, 3:20 mark, I feel like the song could have ended at that time. There's kind of a natural outro. You got the choruses out of the way. You got the bridge. You got the couple of verses in there. But I got to admit, so I say it could have ended. They could have faded it out, and it would have been a good song right there. But my favorite part of the song is after that point. My favorite part of the song is actually the more noodling on the guitar and the
yep.
kind of the change ups they do at the end of the song, those last 30, 40, or 45 seconds. I love that part.
They get to just rock out.
Yeah, it kind of feels for like a very short time jamming,
Yeah.
which is an interesting thing to put on Jack's Mannequin in general, but an interesting thing also in general to say for the first track.
Yeah, I loved it. I really loved it. I know I've mentioned this a few times, but going back and watching that live from the El Rey Theater DVD
Mm-hmm.
and just sort of reliving those old days. And granted, he plays a lot of Jack's songs to this day, and he has Bobby up there with him, and so you get to relive a lot of those moments every time you go and see him. I don't know. There was something about just really rocking it out with Jack's Mannequin. It was good times.
Yeah, well, now I want to watch that again. I have the CD, but I think it came with the DVD. Is that right? I haven't looked at it in a little bit, but
At least the copy I just had come in the mail came with both a CD and a DVD.
yeah. So I do believe that. Okay, I got it for Christmas 2 years ago now. I ought to put that back on again. Do you have a favorite part of the song?
The part that you just mentioned where they're just sort of
Mm-hmm.
jamming, I love that part. I'm like, yeah, that part did rock. Like they were just letting it go. Loved it.
Ironically, though, I feel like this song would make a good end of a movie song. Like it would be a good credits. The credits roll. Whatever the movie was about, I'm not going to try to imagine. But whatever the movie was about, it just kind of feels final. Now, I don't think it would have been a good album ender, but for some reason it reminds me of this
Hmm.
end of a movie type of song. The kind of wrapping up what it is, good or bad. So I don't know. I had this impression. Again, I listened to the song a lot this past week, so I had a lot of random thoughts like that. But that was one that
Sure.
came to mind.
I can kind of see it. It was a good song, but it does sound a little mid to late 2000s, a little bit too.
Yeah.
Yeah, like maybe you're picturing some rom-com or like teen movie from the 2000s and you're thinking it would be good for the soundtrack.
If anybody out there is going to make a film based around like 2008, 2009, whatever the plot, maybe consider this one for the final credits,
Yeah.
But just thought. I mentioned the Live from Omaha version, track 21 on the deluxe edition. You can find that on streaming services, and if you buy the deluxe edition, of course. But I also found this live version. I don't know if I sent this to you, Sam. There's a version of them playing this live, the Wilderness playing this live in Philadelphia in 2019, where they're all standing around the piano. Did I send that one to you?
No.
Okay, I'll have to send it to you. I'll put it in the show notes, too. I've seen them perform other songs like Into the Airwaves from Transit. I've seen them perform that one this way at other concerts. But basically all the band members walk up to the piano and they just kind of play their instruments or just sing and harmonize along with Andrew on it. And they played this song that way, which I was surprised by. I was like, that's kind of a cool, because I consider the song pretty much a deep cut. And
At this
just
point,
kind of,
anyway, yeah.
Yeah, at this point, and to just kind of make it something so special in 2019, so over a decade after it came out, I thought that was pretty cool of them to do. Well, what do you think? Any final thoughts about the song?
No, other than it's a great one. It opened up the album so great, and
Mm-hmm.
Everything in Transit gets a lot of love all these years later, as it should, right?
Yeah.
I was just in Colorado visiting some family, and I have a cousin that's in her early 20s that knows Everything in Transit and didn't learn it from me, right? Like she
Mm-hmm.
independently came across Everything in
Yeah.
Transit, and that's awesome. But this was a great album too.
Mm-hmm.
It really was a great album, and I had so much fun kind of these past couple of weeks knowing I was coming back on the show, re-listening to The Glass Passenger several times over, watching the El Rey Theater show, just kind of taking a trip through memory lane, reminding myself of old college days. And it's a great album. And
I appreciate getting to take a deeper dive into this song in particular. And I was explaining to my wife just before we started recording, we were about to have dinner, and she said, "Which song are you talking about tonight?" And I said, "Crashin'." And just like I mentioned about some of those Something Corporate songs of years ago, she's like, "Yeah, I don't think I know that one." I was like, "You know it." And so I played it, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I know that song." I was like, "Yeah, we heard it live last November," and she's like, "Yeah, I've heard it a lot." I was like, to be honest, if you asked me a month ago, if you said, hum me or sing me Crashin' by Jack's Mannequin, I don't know if I could have done it. But it's just one of those songs that when it comes up in the playlist, I'm like, yeah, that's a good song. But it's not one that like jumps out at me for any specific reason. There's some catchy lines to it, don't get me wrong. There are some cool things going on with it. But I think it's the music I appreciate more about it than even the lyrics, which is kind of rare for an Andrew song. I don't know. Maybe it's 50-50. But anyway, there are Andrew McMahon songs that I know I enjoy, but I couldn't necessarily recall them like that. Now there are many I can, but apparently not this one sometimes. But maybe that'll change after this episode.
yeah,
I appreciate that opportunity. Well, thank you so much for coming back to the podcast, and I'm really glad that you came to talk about this one with me for some of the reasons I just mentioned. That I didn't really have as much of a history or connection with it, so I'm always fascinated when people bring me a song that are like, yeah, there's a song that's special to me, and I'm like, oh, I want to know why this song is special, and then it gives me a whole new perspective on it. So thank you for that.
no, man. And thank you so much for having me on. Like I said, I legit love this podcast that you're doing. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just so cool that I get to be. I can't think of any other podcast I listen to. Like, it's not like I can just email the Daily and be like, "Hey, can I hop on?"
Yeah, no, you can't. You really can't do that.
So,
And those listening, Sam can do it, and you can do it too. So I welcome it. Now, sometimes it does take me a while to get back to people. I admit. There's someone coming up on the podcast in September that I'm equally excited to have on. But it was kind of like, all right, I got to focus on this next episode first, and then we'll get to the next one. So sometimes it just takes me a little while, but I appreciate you being patient and everybody else being patient with me out there.
Oh yeah. If it comes time to be my turn again, now I've done a wilderness one, I've done a Jax one. I would love to do a something corporate one.
Oh yeah, we'll have to. Absolutely. So you think of the song that you want to talk about, and we'll get you back here.
Oh, man, at this point, like you gotta have like a checklist, right? How many episodes of these have you done?
I do. I ought to start sending that out to people at some point to say, here are the 67 songs that have now been covered on Something in the Wilderness. Because you wouldn't know, you wouldn't be able to recall. Heck, I can't even sometimes, which is funny. It's like, wait, have I talked about that song? I have talked about that song. I do it too.
Oh no, that was Spinning. Okay.
Yeah. No, I'll remember. I haven't talked about Spinning. I'll have to find some different things to talk about with that song. Not just how much I think it's like Crashin' or thought it was Crashin'. So I'll have to take a different angle with that one. Well, again, thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate it. I know we've talked about it before. I would like to come on the trivia podcast if you'd have me.
Yeah.
I think that would be fun. I got to admit, I'm a little hesitant because I'm not very good at trivia.
I don't always have people on the show, but when I do, I ask them like, what are your best categories? I'll just do those.
Okay.
So we can just do that, and then we'll have a bonus round where it's all Andrew music.
Oh, nice.
Or at least like associated music or whatever.
Yeah, and hopefully I'll be decent at that. I would think, but I might surprise myself. But it's so funny in that pressure cooker situation when you have like so much time on the clock and you're like, oh my gosh, I know the answer. I'm going to kick myself when I find out what the answer is. My wife and I played pub trivia in Florida when we were vacationing. The kids stayed home with their grandparents, and there was a bar at the corner of where my parents live. And we actually got to the final, I don't know, we were head-to-head with another team. I think we were tied. I think that's what happened.
Yeah.
And it was a number question. Oh, it was how many minutes total? I don't remember. It was how many minutes total for a certain movie series. How many minutes total is counted? No, that'd be a good one. Probably too easy for me. But how many minutes total was a certain movie series? And I thought I had it, and you couldn't go over. And I was like 2 minutes over or something. I was like, what? So it drove me nuts.
Us trivia hosts, we're unforgiving. Yeah.
It's like rules are rules, Again, thank you, Sam. So we'll be talking soon, it sounds like. And I'll leave us with a quote here from the song. Even if your voice comes back again, maybe there will be no one listening. And even if I find the strength to stand, doesn't mean I won't go on.
Love it.